This video will walk you through creating a grid, at least a simple grid. A lot of the details I won't be going through, but I'll show you at least how to get started and point you into directions that you may need to go. But we're now in CharmEd, not Charm, and not CharmINetMaps, but just CharmEd, which stands for Charm Editor. And in the Edit menu, you can go for Grid, and then that brings up a grid, and it defaults to whatever the last dimensions were for a grid that you had. In this case here, I think it was 11 by 11. But to set one up, you go to the Setup menu and define Grid. And in here, you have some options. Hopefully, you've made a map from using CharmINetMaps. So we can go to bring one of those up, or a map up. And let me yes. You may see a little cross because this also defaults to the last one, and I had last position. And so that's where I have the lower left of the grid that I'm going to do, the southwest corner. And since that's already been defined, then you come back to this dialog. As I say, the lower left corner, you've got to have some kind of latitude and longitude, and the easiest way to set it was just what I did is I go to a map to find it. Then you can define how many grid cells you want in each direction and what the grid spacings are, or dimensions for each grid cell. And then to make sure that it looks right, because you may need to move it a little bit or resize it a bit, you can hit Browse for size and location. And in that case, you get you get the same map, but now you have a grid that you can see. And I'm going to zoom in by just rolling the mouse wheel. And that covers the area that I wanted to cover, so I'm not going to change anything. But those are the first two things, or first three things you have to do. First one is create a map. Second is to define where the lower left is. Third is verify that your grid cell are actually covering the area of interest. Once that's all done, then you can say OK. Now, I also am assuming that you have read some of the help, because in Charm you can do Shift F1 key, and a little question mark will appear. And so, like, I want to import some terrain or land use, and so the easiest way to find out how to do that is to go into the help, and then you click on that import and it brings up the help. Now I will warn you, for instance, I know on this one the link to go and get the data is not functional, and this is like the third or fourth time I've changed it, so I'm not sure I'm going to change it again because they're constantly changing it, but the file name is the same. And if you need the GLCC, which actually covers the entire globe, but it's pretty coarse, then let me know and I'll give you a link so you can download it from somewhere else. But it's the same thing on other items. Let's import, for instance, GeoTIFF terrain. So there's a lot of places you can get GeoTIFF terrain data, but that shows you how the help works, and also that there's a number of imports that you can do. In my case, I'm going to import, I think I had a GeoTIFF already, so I will grab it, at which time you can see the numbers have all changed from 0 to something else. And they've gone from red to green. Green just means you have more than like 90% coverage for those grid cells. If you need more than one TIFF file, or more than one any terrain data, you can ask for all that you need to fill in the entire grid. It will just use each one to fill in areas that are missing. And just like terrain, you can bring in land use. I'm just going to go to the GLCC, which is, as I say, a very coarse land use file. Presumably you're going to have better values, or you can edit it directly in setup. You can set everybody's land use or everybody's surface roughness, because land use is used to just determine what the surface roughness is, and or you can set all elevations. And or if you just want to do a few of them, you can select by just holding down and dragging the mouse and make a rectangular area, and then you can edit just that selection or just that land use selection, because the result or the defaults are you just have elevations and you have surface roughness. As I say, land use gets translated into surface roughness. So once you've got those defined, you can go to, well, a couple of useful entries. Number one, under the View menu, is Grid Limits. Shows you the high and low elevation, shows you the high and low surface roughness. In this case here, the surface roughness is all the same. As I say, that GLCC is very coarse. At least there's about 11 meters difference in heights. And then you can go to 3D display. And of course you can't see much because the elevation of the grid isn't all that grand and wonderful. But the 3D display becomes more important if you have, or if you're going to find solid cells, which I will just go through quickly. It's not needed to do a normal run, but if you're going to throw in, for instance, a building, I'm going to select this area here and go over to solid cells, and then I will edit. I may be able to edit. Nope. I have to go up one because all these T's means that those are all solid cells except for these down here, which are empty. And I cannot define a terrain cell as other than terrain. So I'm going to go up one solid cell. Oh, I guess I'm going to have to go up a couple or three. Let me go up 4. You can see I didn't fully practice this beforehand, but okay, so now I have clear cells there. I'm going to create solid cells by edit selection. I'm going to say I'm going to make some cells solid. They're going to start from the level I'm looking at, and I'm going to have them or start cell I'm looking at and go up 2 or go up 1, because that will mean that I actually end up with 2. 1 being the altitude I'm at, and then I will go up 1. So that is a total of 2. Now those show up as S's for solid cell. Now if you go to 3D display, we can see that there are another level of cells in here above the ground level. Make it a little clearer to see. You can open up a map. I'll just use the same map. And if I move it around, you can see, I think it makes it easier to see that of course, this doesn't correspond to anything because I don't have any information about a building right there. There is a building over here, which I could have selected, but I just arbitrarily went with what I went with. Now at this point, I'm going to clear all the solid cells, since that was just for purposes of education. And I'm going to go back down to ground level. And I'll go back to our elevation. And I just wanted to point out, there is just a quickie, there is a thing called subgrid. And if you select an area, then this create is available, and the area that you've selected there, you can hit create, and then you can tell it how many subdivisions to have of these cells in the X, Y, and Z. And keep in mind, the Z's are there. For the most part, you're working in 2D here, except when you're looking at the 3D display. But keep in mind the Z. So if you subdivide your X and Y, you probably want to subdivide the Z by about as many subdivisions as in the X and Y. Don't just leave it at 1 and hope everything comes out okay. And so that, well, you can bring in a map on this 2D display as well. So you have visual context that you're creating your grid in or creating your objects in. Now, one thing that will be important, not immediately, but someday or other, and especially if you make subgrids, and that is to create your grid title. So it just defaults to default grid, but, you know, I'm going to just put in home area. And then once you've done all that, which is really not that much, it's just really elevation land use. And now I'm going to save that. So home area 6. And so now we have a grid. And later on, you can go over to Charm, Complex Terrain Charm. Grids have no place in the flat terrain version of Charm. But you can later go into Charm and just read that file or the grid file in. And I'll have another video of doing that, give you a couple caveats and doing a simple run. And that's it.